Okay, welcome to our webinar on record keeping for crop insurance. So what's so important about keeping farm records? So records are needed for crop insurance and tax purposes, but also for your own use. Most crop insurance policies or programs need at least 5 years of records in order to apply. There are some options for beginning growers that might only have 3 or 4 years of records, or people that are switching crops or commodities. The insurance agent would be able to tell you if your policy or program is one that they can substitute like county records or other local records for a couple of your years if you don't have 5 years. And every policy or program may require different records. So that's why it's important to keep kind of just a broad range of records just in case you switch policies or programs. You may need something different than what you needed before. And before you begin the application process, try to have most of your records together before beginning the application process. So some of the crop and production details you might need would be a farm number. If you're applying for an FSA program, you'll definitely need the farm serial number from the FSA. You also need crop names and varieties or types. So you may be growing multiple varieties of pumpkins or squash. So you just want to keep a list of the specific varieties and types. Maybe not so much for crop insurance, but for your own records. So you can remember, hey, I grew this a few years ago. I didn't like that variety, or that variety sold really well. Also, it's good to keep the intended use of the crop. So do you plan to sell it fresh, or will it be processed, maybe value added into jams or salsas? Will you sell it direct to market, directly to the consumers, or will you sell it to maybe a food distributor or groceries or restaurants? This could determine which, maybe programs you apply for or the payment you receive, the prices. The next thing also would determine the pricing if you were to receive a payment. And that's organic or conventional practices, and even transition to organic. Some programs will offer you different prices for your crop value, depending on if you're organic or in transition. So you could receive those higher payments based on the higher market price. You'll also need to know if it's irrigated or non-irrigated. Some policies require the crops to be irrigated in order to have coverage. So you'll want to have a record to prove that, yes, it was irrigated this many years. And then you'll need planting dates and locations. This is more important for people that are growing in multiple locations or multiple counties. And then you need some tax and IRS information, specifically the Schedule F. And this is used to report all the taxable income earned from farming or agricultural activities. So if you have a farm number, or if you're receiving any income from farming, you are already filling out the Schedule F. And the Schedule F is very important for anyone pursuing a whole farm revenue protection policy, because that ensures based on the income that's in these tax documents and not your yield history. So if you're keeping a Schedule F and you're keeping those records, it should be easier to fill out your application instead of you having to search for those past tax documents. You'll also need to know the IRS accounting method. So are you a cash basis taxpayer, or are you an accrual basis taxpayer? Most farms are cash basis taxpayer. That means they report the money they receive for their what they've sold, and they report it, the when they receive the money. So if I sell my tomatoes, I'm going to put that on the tax year I sold and received the money. Accrual would be if you've got large contracts and maybe you set up like a credit line for purchasers. So you would record when you in the year that you set up that payment. So if I sold my tomatoes to someone in 2021, but they don't pay me until 2022, with cash I would report 2022, but accrual I'm reporting it in 2021. And if you're either of you will know which one you are, and because that determines which sections you fill out on the Schedule F. You'll also need tax year. So are you a calendar filer, or are you an early fiscal or late fiscal filer? And then you'll need to know when your fiscal year begins and when it ends. Now I've got a few examples of an application for whole farm revenue protection. I found this one online. It may not be exactly what you see when you go to fill out an application, but I just wanted to show some of the things these are asking for. So this one starts with like an inventory of the commodity. So it's asking for commodity name. Then it moves into locations, beginning inventory. So like how much are you planting at the beginning? And then what's your expected values for that? And then you'll do the same thing, but at the end of the insurance period. So if any of that got modified or you earned more or less, you would note that there. This next part is all about accounts receivable and accounts payable. So commodity name, name of the address or the buyer, and then how much you sold it for, how much they still owe you. And then the accounts payable, maybe you had to buy in peppers one year. So who you got it from, how much they sold them to you for, and if you still owe them, what your balance is. And then this last sheet is allowable revenue. And so you can see right here at the top, it says Schedule F, Part 1 for cash basis taxpayers, or Part 3 for accrual basis taxpayers. And so on the left-hand side, you can see Schedule F line number. So it's literally telling you where you would pull these numbers, these figures from your tax document to put right in this application. So if you're keeping on track with those tax documents, this part of the application process should be easy for you. Then it goes into some detail about farm operation. So you start with intended yield and your expected value and expected revenue. So these are, you're basing it on how much you're planting, how much you've yielded in the past based on what you planted, and then how much you plan to sell it for. I want to note this also has shares. So you can apply for crop insurance if you've got a partner in your farm. You can apply for coverage of your share of the farm. So maybe your partner doesn't want to insure their part, but you can insure your share, and your percent production would go on this form. And then you would revise this later on, maybe mid growing season or at the end of the insurance period, with actual quantity, actual cost basis, actual share, and actual percent production. And then you would also finish that up with the final revenue and the final totals. And so next I want to move on to the workbook we created. We created a crop insurance record keeping workbook. It's available on the Kentucky Horticulture Council website. We've shared it to Facebook, and it's in the chat of the Zoom right now. And this workbook is something we compiled based on some others we looked at, things we thought maybe horticulture growers or specialty crop growers might need specifically. So feel free to download that and print it out, print as many copies as you'd like. Some of the sheets may need multiple copies. So the first sheet is crop rotation and input history by field. And this one covers 5 years. So some of the sheets cover 5 years, some just cover 1 year, some are all about a crop, so they'll cover a crop over multiple years. This one is about your field. So this is cataloging the fields, plots, row names, or high tunnels that you have. And you start with that on the left-hand side. Then you'll move into how many acres or row feet was this field, plot, high tunnel, or row. And then whether you own or you rent the land that this field is on. And then when you move into the years, you put your crop code. So maybe in this row, I'm growing tomatoes. You would put the crop code for tomatoes. I would put any inputs and cover crops. And then I would put whether it's conventional, organic, or transition to organic. I'm sorry. And then the next year you would do the same. But if you changed commodity, maybe you are rotating your crops. So you would change that crop code. Maybe you wanted to do different inputs or try a different cover crop. You would make note of that as well. Also, this allows you to say, maybe I'm changing to organic, so I can put transition there because I would need to be in transition for several years before I would be certified organic. So this would allow you to keep track of maybe which field was on which year of transition. Next, we have a sheet all about crop and production details. And this is for 1 year, so you'd need a different copy for each year. So on the left-hand side, you start with crop name, variety, and type. This is a good way to keep track of what you're growing, what you grew each year, and the varieties. Then you move into production methods. So was it in a field? Was it in a high tunnel or a greenhouse? Maybe it was hydroponic, maybe it was aquaponic. Whatever way you grow these tomatoes or peppers or squash, whatever you're growing, you would put in that next box. The next column is all about intended use. So do you plan to sell it fresh? Do you plan to sell it processed? Where do you plan to sell it? I would almost split this box into 2 halves, and the first half do my intended, and then later on, after the growing season is finished, I might, if I had to tweak something, maybe I planned to sell it fresh, but I ended up selling it in salsa or jam. You could go back and make a note of that. Maybe so next year you can say, I grew tomatoes to sell fresh, but they didn't look that great, so I had to sell them as salsa. What if I plan to do that again? Maybe I need to change how many I'm growing. For whatever reason, it's always good to go back and reevaluate at the end of your growing season. Next, you put conventional organic or transition to organic, irrigated or non-irrigated. Like I mentioned, that was important for several policies. And then you move on to planting dates. I would also make note if you had to replant anything, maybe you had to replant the whole row or you had to fill in holes, always make a note of that. And then lastly, location. So field, row, high tunnel number, etc. Just so that you can remember, oh yeah, this crop was in this row in this high tunnel. The next sheet is a 5-year estimated and actual individual crop income and expenses worksheet. So this one goes by crop. So you would have 1 sheet per different crop you're growing. It does go by year, but there's 2 columns per year. So you have estimated year and actual year. So that is 1 whole year. You start with income, so yield per acre. You could even do yield per row, yield per high tunnel, however it works for you. I know a lot of specialty crop growers aren't growing acres upon acres. Then you would do your price. So this is good for your estimated, at the beginning of the growing season, estimate how much you plan to sell it for, and then make note of what you actually sold it for. Maybe you decreased in price throughout the growing season. And then you go to total income per acre. So that way you can say, I had this many acres or this many rows of this crop, and this is how much I owned I earned per row or acre. Then it moves on to your expenses. And this is your totals for your expenses. So you may need to keep separate worksheets or separate notebook sheets of your labor costs. So all your hours in labor, all your wages, and then you're just putting your total on this. So this is an easy sheet to look at, so you can see, my total labor has increased this much every year. But it's also looking for things like seed costs, soil amendments, fertilizer and lime, cover crops, weed control, building rent, or maybe building repairs if you own the land or own the building. Fuel and oil, so you could also include maybe equipment repairs in that cost if you've got tractors or tillers or mowers. Then insurance costs, so this could be your crop insurance costs or your farm liability insurance costs. Then it moves into utilities, marketing, storage, processing fees, and then professional services. So maybe you had soil sampling, maybe you had water testing, or you had some advisors or consultants come out that had a fee. Then we've got things like real estate tax, lease, and interest. So some of those aren't growing specific, but they're costs and expenses you need to keep in mind when you're gathering all these documents, especially for your tax records. The next worksheet might be the best one that will help a lot of specialty crop growers and horticulture growers. It's the direct marketing worksheet. So this is for anyone selling at farmers markets or on-farm markets, selling directly to consumers. This does have a little instruction. If you're selling from an on-farm market, you just want to list the amount sold. You can skip the amount taken to market and the amount returned home. So on this sheet, you start on the left-hand side. This sheet could be for maybe 1 week, 1 month. You could do it by crop, or you could do it by like year, however you want it to work. But on the left-hand side, you start with the commodity name, then you move to the market you sold to, the name or location. Then you move into the amount taken to market. So how many bushels, how many pounds did you take with you? The next column is how much returned home. So how much did you not sell? Next, you move on to amount sold. And so this may not be the difference between amount taken and amount returned home, because you may have lost some that you noticed was damaged en route, or someone dropped it there, or maybe you donated some. So you want to make sure that you are filling out amounts sold specifically. Then you want to put the price you sold it at. You may have different prices depending on which market you sell to, or even the time of year. So that can always change. And then you put your revenue on the end. This might be useful for you to look and see, I took this many pounds of peppers to this market the past few weeks, and I returned home with a majority of that. Maybe I need to not take as much with me next time so that I don't have any loss due to travel or like perishability out in the heat all day. The next one is maybe more for large scale growers or growers that are growing one single commodity on several acres, but it's still just as important. So it's all about field, high tunnel, and plot location. This one you're wanting to keep track of where you're growing, which field or plot you're growing in. You need to mark if there's a section of the field, mark that, the county you're in. So a lot of crop insurance policies go by county. You may need multiple policies depending on how many counties you grow in. So it's always important to have that record of those counties so your agent can see which ones you're growing in. You'll also need a FSA farm number and tract number. The tract number may be different depending on which field you're growing in. You'll need FSA field number or other identifying methods, address or closest road, and then maybe high tunnel number or identification. This would be for an agent that needs to come visit your plot or your tract to take pictures for the policy or make a report of damage. Also, any appraisals that need to be done. And then the last sheet is a 5-year individual field activity log. And this one can go by field or by crop. You would indicate that at the top, and then you want to put acres or row feet that you have in that field or in that crop. This sheet is a long sheet, so I did crop it to in order to show us all the different things we're recording. And this is a 5-year worksheet, so you can compare year to year based on some of these things it's asking for. So it's asking things like cover crop type, your spring planting date of your cover crop termination date, and your method. So did you use chemicals to terminate? Did you mow or till? That could be important based on some of the pricing you're going for, like if you're going for organic or transition. If you used chemicals to kill your cover crop, you may not qualify for those. It's looking for basic tillage method and the date. You do that. You do it multiple times, list several dates. Soil amendments and date application and rate. Manure source, date and rate of manure application. The crop planted, which crop did you plant in this field? Planting date, seed varieties, seeding rate. That could be important if they see that you didn't have enough seed for the acreage you were applying for coverage. So of course you had low yield. You may not receive a payment for that. Crop monitoring, so any problem, weeds, pests, or crop vigor you notice, and then what dates did you notice that? And then you'll want pest management inputs, disease management inputs, weed management, and you'll want dates and rates of application for all of those. Harvest date, estimated yields. Don't forget to put how you measure your yields, bushels, pounds, or tons. That may determine what policies you can apply for, or specifics about your policy, which way you're reporting your yields. And then if you had to have your crops stored, you would need some information on that as well. And before we finish up, I just have a few thoughts and tips on record keeping. Me personally, I think you can never be too thorough. I know some people get a little confused, or it can be too much to keep very thorough records. So keep as much as you think is necessary. After a while, you'll know what is needed specifically for crop insurance, but you personally may want to keep more records or some specific records that aren't required, because they're not just for tax or insurance purposes. It can save you some production money, some production time, and headaches from losing money or not earning enough for what you're putting into your fields. And not every workbook or template will work for you. So pick and choose from this one, find some more online, make your own. Don't be afraid to print out and use whiteout on this workbook if you think you need a different set of records kept. My personal tip is to record everything. My background is ornamental greenhouse production, and I would keep a day-to-day log of what we did on specific crops, what we did in the greenhouse every day. That can be a lot for some people, but especially if you're farming with partners or with multiple people out in the field, just to know what everyone's doing. And that way you're not having to sit later on and think for your crop insurance application, you know, how much of this did we plant that one year? If you've got a day-to-day record, you can always you just look back instead of having to sit there and think. So we want to promote our next webinar, which will be a Q&A with an insurance agent. That will be February 8th at the same time as today's, which is 11:30 Central and 12:30 Eastern. And then in February or in March, we'll have a webinar on FSA resources. We want to thank our funders, Southern Risk Management Education Center, and the USDA National Institute of Food and Agriculture for providing the funds for this webinar series, the workbook, and all the work that goes into it. Thanks.